Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C., calling your attention, as always, to Tarpley.net, and to Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed. So we're continuing with the worldwide strategy of tension. It may be that this worldwide campaign of Anglo-American intelligence has lost some momentum in the past week, but don't be fooled and don't let up your mobilization. Remember that the killer cuts, the deadly austerity, which this strategy of tension is devised to cover and to force through, this monstrosity of the sequester in particular, this is a rolling sequester. It is going on all the time, everywhere. Its effects are cumulative. It is building up. The rage of the American people against the forces of austerity is building. And if policy elites have their attention fixed on these questions about should the U.S. invade and bomb Syria, well, that's up to those policy elites. But the U.S., the American people are interested in defending their economic rights. Now, we've had this fatuous news this morning that the U.S. unemployment rate is at a 4-year low. This is obviously a complete fraud. It's built on despair. It's built on people dropping out of the unemployment of the employment force. That was the labor force, and we're going to see that this is the main factor, along with Obama's lack of a jobs program, in this malaise which has been gripping the Obama administration this past week, right, since his press conference, which was considered to be the first time that an American president had assured people that he was still alive. Reports of his death, his demise, were much exaggerated, said Obama, nevertheless, there's something there. If you have an economic depression, which we have, with mass unemployment, between 20 and 25%, unemployment at depression levels, and you have a regime that has no jobs program, nothing but austerity, nothing but the chained CPI and $400 billion more in Medicare cuts, any regime like that is adrift and may at any point go over the falls. And that is the situation of the Obama regime, and we'll look into that in some more detail. But the other question, of course, that the strategy of tension is designed to facilitate, to include, and to bring on, is the attack on Syria. And we've had a mobilization of the warmonger party over the past couple of weeks. There has been some blowback, to be sure. The blowback is not enough, but it is there. Unfortunately, we haven't had any mass anti-war demonstrations to speak of in the United States or in other countries, and therefore this could happen at any time. Right? The warmonger left, the pro-war left, the leftists who recognize themselves in Amy Goodman and Democracy Now. She celebrates her alternative media at the same time that WBAI New York and WPFW Washington are always in danger of shutting down from one week to the next. That kind of warmonger left, right? Well, you can't have a left if it's a warmonger left. And if you put Al Jazeera on your air, what do you expect? And that's what's happened to these poor radio stations. But we have to deal now with this problem of the attack on Syria. We've got Secretary of Defense Hagel in the last couple of days talking about the possibility that the U.S. is considering providing more weapons to the Syrian terrorists. And we have to repeat tirelessly, who are those Syrian rebels? They're not rebels. They are terrorists. It's not just the Assad regime that calls them terrorists, right? We hear on the radio, on NPR sometimes, the Assad regime insists on calling these pro-democracy rebels terrorists. Well, they are terrorists. They are al-Qaeda terrorists You might as well say the State Department has insisted on calling them the Al-Nusra Brigade, a branch of Al-Qaeda. And while there are some places in the world where, if you're from Al-Qaeda, I suppose if you're driving around in Yemen, you're eligible to be attacked by a drone, in Syria, you are eligible to be given a grant, to be given a weapon, to be given all kinds of benefits, and to be given a publicity campaign of the type that David Ignatius of the Washington Post has been giving to General Salim Idris. General Idris. This guy is now the new Ahmed Shalabi. He is the new Nguyen Cao Ky. He is the new General Van Ture. He's the new General Yunus. And I think he ought to look at the fate of Yunus, right? General Yunus was the guy who was put in charge of the Libyan rebels, but then it turned out that the CIA had another candidate, Hifter, and they got rid of Yunus. So Salim Idris is skating on thin ice. But it was already clear last week when David Ignatius came back from his trip to the Middle East last week. He was full of enthusiasm for this wonderful new beaming face of democracy in the Middle East, and that is General Salim Idris. Let's listen to some lines from the puff piece that appeared yesterday, Thursday, May 2nd, in the Washington Post, and it's called Our Friend in the Fight. Syria, our friend in the fight. We have a new friend. It's General Salim Idris. The Obama administration is placing a large bet on the ability of a former Syrian professor of military engineering to build a coherent rebel army that can defeat the regime of Bashar al-Assad, combat Islamic radicalism, and help build a new stable Syria. General Salim Idris, the commander of the rebels' Supreme Military Council, is the centerpiece of the administration's new strategy. Now, new, it certainly is new, because what was it, 6 weeks ago, 8 weeks ago? We were told that Khatib was the key guy in the Syrian National Coalition. Remember him, Khatib, the executive of Royal Dutch Shell, with a father who worked very closely with the French under the French occupation. Well, Khatib was apparently used up quite quickly. And then we had a guy from Texas, an American Syrian guy who had very little to do with Syria, but came from Syria originally. He was an IT executive from Texas. His name has failed to make a lasting impression, so we won't even mention him here. But he's now off the screen. And now we have General Salim Idris. And General Salim Idris gave an interview to David Ignatius. The general repeated in an interview this Tuesday the sensible, moderate positions that made him so attractive to the administration. He's a solid ally, writes David Ignatius in the Washington Post. But caution is needed. The United States is turning to Idris late in the game. He's going to do everything he can for us, but it's very late in the day, and asking him to create a tight command and control structure out of a ragged factionalized force, that may be mission impossible. So we're told Idris is a German-trained engineer who defected from Assad's army. So we had Khatib, Royal Dutch Shell, being pushed out by the Texas guy, and now that guy pushed out by a German-trained general. So struggle among the NATO allies. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Tarpley.net and Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed are the ticket to keep up with what's going on in the world. Our new friend in Syria, the golden boy of the CIA, being introduced by David Ignatius and others. General Salim Idris. Idris is taking a strong stand against the al-Nusra Front. It's an offshoot of al-Qaeda in Iraq. We don't work with al-Nusra, says General Salim Idris. We don't share anything with them. They just had a meeting, his group, right, his group of fighters. We're not told how many they are, what percentage, how do they stack up against al-Nusra. But he said, we had a meeting, but we didn't invite those people from al-Nusra. Of course, there's a growing reluctance in the mainstream umbrella group run by Idris to work with Nusra. You see, it's all falling into place. Isn't it wonderful? Al-Nusra, they say, Al-Nusra has not been stopped in its gains, but the rate of progress of Al-Nusra has at least been slowed down. And we just had a wonderful help to General Idris. A shipment of humanitarian assistance on Tuesday arrived in Turkey and is now being distributed to Idris's forces. And the packages, how about this? Packages paid for by the U.S. taxpayer bear the crest of the Supreme Military Council, i.e. Idris. So it's supposed to be the faction that Idris runs. And now, of course, we read a little bit further, we find that even though General Salim Idris is, of course, the dream candidate of the Democratic forces, the U.S. still won't give, or they claim they won't give shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles to the rebels over there because they're afraid they might show up at Ben Gurion Airport in Israel or at Kennedy Airport, I might add. So you get the idea. Idris's task is to squeeze the extremists. And we even have this touching gesture. General Idris has written to Obama. He wrote from one hero of democracy to another. Idris sent a letter on Tuesday to Obama, and he said, Mr. President, I understand the reasons behind your cautious involvement in Syria. We desperately need your support, as the Free Syrian Army under my command has neither the requisite training nor equipment to counter the effects of Assad's chemical weapons or to destroy them. And unfortunately, at the end of, I guess, Ignatius wants to keep his job next year as well as this year. He's got to put in a démenti at the end, a possible escape clause. Nobody should forget that the sort of paramilitary covert action program which is being launched here, while it sometimes appears to be the best among bad options, almost never has a happy ending. One might say has almost never had a happy ending. So you get the idea. We have a new hero. So Idris is going to be the middle road, right, that will allow the U.S. to influence the situation, but not to have any effect. Now, naturally, this is all dripping with sarcasm, right? This character, this is the third desperado leading a bunch of thugs, and these people are being successively squeezed out by precisely the Nusra Brigade. So we have the wonderful situation where the Obama administration is actively supporting al-Qaeda to take over Syria. I can see the headlines, right, 1 to 2 years from now. Who lost Syria? Obama impeached in House of Representatives. Case goes to Senate. I'm not calling for it. Just, these are clearly the dynamics, right? This is the way the world has worked and may again worked. So the other question, of course, is the chemical weapons, right? The hysteria over the chemical weapons of last week has cooled somewhat. And, of course, cooling them is mainly the Obama press conference earlier this week. On Tuesday, Obama gave his press conference, and he was badgered by the warmonger press, all kinds of warmonger journalists, right? Everybody vying to be, I'm the new Judith Miller. No, I'm the new Judith Miller. Obama backed off. I guess Obama has a survival instinct in the same way that Hillary does. Not for the country, but for himself. Obama's world, of course, notoriously narcissistic and egocentric. Obama's confronted with the red line. Well, have we crossed the red line? Where are the attacks? Where are the body bags, said the press. And Obama, of course, then disappeared into a cloud of utopian rhetoric. Reality is, of course, the American people are sick of war. All the polls show chemical weapons or no chemical weapons. The American people do not care. People who are closer to this crisis should figure it out for themselves. And ultimately, that is what that's Obama's line, too. Obama basically says he wants an attack on Syria, but he wants it done by Turkey, Britain, and France. Above all, by Turkey, because that will be a way of permanently wrecking and weakening Turkey. So we've also then got the question of the role of the UN, and this is another chapter of shame. Last week, as a result of the hysteria about chemical weapons, and remember, it's the Israelis, the British, and the French, two discredited former colonial powers, and, of course, the Israelis, a pariah in that neighborhood and most other neighborhoods, and with good reason. The Israelis, the British, and the French start screaming that there are chemical weapons. The U.S. gives a half-hearted, lukewarm confirmation. The Syrian government responded to that by inviting Ban Ki-moon, the puppet Secretary General of the United Nations, right, the South Korean puppet of the U.S. Ban Ki-moon is invited by the Syrian government, saying essentially, look, these rebels claim that some chemical weapons have been used here in Aleppo or a couple of other places. Why don't you come and look at these specific sites and do a test and send in some inspectors and tell us what it looks like, and then we can evaluate the case, right? Clarify the specific reports. Ban Ki-moon sent back a missive, a letter to the Syrian government saying, no, that's not enough. It's nowhere near enough to see those specific sites. Ban Ki-moon said, we demand that our inspectors be allowed to look at all Syrian territory, everywhere in Syria. Obviously, a wonderful chance for spying, for espionage, for organizing destabilization, right, for helping the rebels and all this other stuff. Access to all of Syrian territory and access to every person in Syria. They could say, we demand to go see Assad right now, and then they'll say, oh, yes, he's in Palace XYZ. Then the inspectors get on the phone and tell the rebels, Assad is in Palace XYZ. Go in there for the attack. So this is exactly the language used by the United Nations towards Serbia in 1999 and towards Iraq. Go everywhere, talk to anybody. It has been rejected, and Lavrov deserves some kudos for his indignant refutation of this.
Starts here.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. So, Ban Ki-moon back into his usual despicable role as puppet of the NATO consensus, right? The NATO version of the international community. We're also told that Brahimi is attempting to quit. And it looks like Brahimi, one of the things that's pushing Brahimi over the edge is precisely this non-even-handedness. In other words, that even though the UN is supposed to be above the parties, supposed to be an honest broker, obviously it's not. And also, and think of it, Brahimi himself, not exactly pristine, but you get the idea. He's now fed up with the fact that there's no pressure on the rebels to do anything. The terrorists can run wild. Nothing is said against them, and we're constantly hearing this sickening distortion. 70 to 80,000 people have been killed in Syria, and all that blood is on Assad's hands. Well, I'm sorry, no. There are al-Qaeda death squads, even according to the U.S. State Department, that are operating there. So much of the blood is also on the hands of these death squads. And remember, the responsibility for war rests with the aggressor. Self-defense is not aggression. And the regime in this case is carrying out legitimate self-defense, whereas the terrorist al-Qaeda death squads and so forth, Nusra brigades, they are the aggressors in this case. Now, there's still talk on National Pentagon Radio this morning that a humanitarian zone may be in the offing. We were for a couple of days there last weekend, especially before Obama's Tuesday press conference. We were on the brink of something, I think. Obama has somewhat pulled back from that brink, but given his weakness and vacillation, and given the fact that he's under a lot of pressure, right, to show that he's not a lame duck, to show that he has a pulse, we could have some kind of intervention at any time. The humanitarian zone, the idea here is to carve out an area. I would compare it to the Sudetenland, if you want. In the previous crisis, you can see there's a online on Tarpley.net and elsewhere, you can find an analysis where I go through a comparison of the Syrian crisis with the events in Czechoslovakia, right? So now we have a new headline. The new headline, if we will, is this guy, General Issa. The humanitarian zone, and with a no-fly zone over it, of course, obviously this presupposes a comprehensive bombing campaign. And we heard the people on National Pentagon Radio, right, the warmonger review of the week. They were going through how they could remember back in the days of Libya in 2011, there was a period when 300 cruise missiles had to be launched, right? They would like that done with cruise missiles because they're very much afraid that the Syrians may well be able to shoot down some NATO jets. The figure bandied about on the National Pentagon broadcast this morning was that the Syrian air defenses are equal to 500%, 5 times the power of the Libyan air defenses. And then one of the more warmonger participants in the conversation said, yes, but of course, 2 months ago, the Israelis wanted to bomb something, and they were able to fly in under the radar, do their bombing, get out with no losses. Well, maybe that's the fact that the Syrians are more astute, because if you just have report, Syrian anti-aircraft defenses shoot down Israeli jet. Naturally, that would then be a worldwide hysteria. It would be placed, of course, on the Israeli side of the border. At the moment where the Syrians can see that it's not a general air assault, but an isolated case, they may well decide to hold their fire and with the idea that you're going to lure the enemy into a trap later on by making it look like a cakewalk. We know that neocon strategic thinking it has a tendency, a proclivity to view these adventures as cakewalks. And if you have a case like this, look, the Israelis did it. Well, if they're going to come, then maybe they're going to come and find an unpleasant surprise. It is not known to what degree Russia has armed Syria with the more modern or even the most modern surface-to-air missiles. Naturally, in the interest of preserving world peace, avoiding war, and maintaining deterrence, it is in the interest of the world that the Syrian air defenses be as formidable as possible and that they be purely defensive with no offensive ability whatsoever. So there we have that situation, and we remain, needless to say, on the brink. Now, we have to look at the question linked to this, which is the Benghazi question. Fox News seems to have gone into a foaming rage fit this week. the reactionaries in general this week seem to be going through an extremely bitter phase. Maybe it has to do with the fact that Obama has backed away from the red line. They thought they had him there. They were goading him to cross the red line to attack Syria and so forth. Obama's not going to do it for the moment because he's concerned about Obama, not about you, but about Obama. Instead, the reactionaries have been foaming. And here's what we have. This is now the James Rosen report, Fox News. Rupert Murdoch, of course, Bilderberger, what can we say? James Rosen of Fox News reports that there are 3 State Department officials and 1 CIA official who, in an outrageous move by the Obama regime, they are being prevented from getting to the bottom of this case. There are three whistleblowers, so-called, from the State Department, 1 whistleblower from the CIA. Naturally, we live in a time when whistleblowers often turn out to be playback agents. We live in a time when whistleblowers turn out to be double agents, don't we? We look at somebody like Assange. He claims to be a whistleblower. That's his claim to fame. He posts himself as the greatest whistleblower of the age, Julian Assange. But then when we look at the details of what he's telling us, it seems that his list of plug uglies and monsters in the world is the same as the CIA hit list. How can this be? We also had last week, we had some other cases, right? We'll go into those in a minute. But you get the idea. Now, we're told that there are 3 State Department officials, 1 CIA official, and they want to come forward and tell the truth. So who's stopping them? They have engaged or somehow have become associated with the lawyer Victoria Tonsing. This charming lady is now an aging reactionary torpedo. She belongs to the 9/11 and even earlier. She was around in the 1990s. She was there as part of the Whitewater Gate apparatus. She was part of the Get Clinton task force operating at that time. And Victoria Tonsing says, well, the Obama regime is doing these 2 things. They're telling the 3 State Department people and the 1 CIA person, you better not do anything or that will destroy your career. Well, okay. And then the other thing, she says, in an even greater outrage, the Obama regime is denying the lawyers for the whistleblowers clearance to go on a fishing expedition in government files so that they can fish up something on this fishing expedition and use that against Obama. Okay, we'll be back in just a minute on World Crisis Radio. To World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. So we've got Victoria Tonsing attempting to relaunch her fading career on Fox News with the help of this other character, Rosen, and putting that up that these wonderful whistleblowers from the State Department and the CIA, they're being threatened. If they come out and tell the whole truth like they want to, then they will lose their careers. And how dare the administration not give security clearances to the lawyers for these whistleblowers so that they can go delving into government records on a fishing expedition? Somehow this fails to convince. Now, Obama was confronted with this story on Tuesday in his White House surprise press conference on Tuesday morning. And Obama was confronted by Ed Henry. And essentially the tone of this was, what? You say you're not familiar with our blockbuster report from yesterday evening? How dare you, Obama, right? Everybody hangs on every word of Fox News, right? Well, I'm sorry. Fox News' Victoria Tonsing and this character James Rosen, as well as Ed Henry himself, this adds up to a gaggle of reactionaries, and I don't know why anybody should pay attention to this. Above all, though, we're interested in the truth of the matter, and the truth of the matter is not what the Obama administration says, and it's not what Fox News says. Let's just remind ourselves. It was the 11th of September, 2013, and it was time for an October surprise. It was time to knock Obama out of the election race, and it was time to bring in Mitt Romney. And Mitt Romney was an even worse, a far more brutal austerity dictatorship than what we have right now. This would have been a nightmare. Make no mistake. Wars would already have been launched by Romney, given that gaggle of neocons. It would have been the Texas chainsaw approach to every entitlement, to every form of government-sponsored health care, food, social program, whatever it is. So they wanted him out. And they had the cooperation of the Petraeus CIA. Any account of this Benghazi event that does not put General David Petraeus and the CIA at the center of this is a cover-up. And I don't say that as a whistleblower. I say it as somebody who looks at the events and puts two and two together. And we know that there was a group inside the State Department, including Ambassador Ford for Syria and Ambassador Stevens for Libya. The function, the assignment of those people was to secure a sufficient flow of terrorist killers, death squad veterans, and weaponry from Gaddafi's arsenals from Libya to Turkey and then on to Syria. Remember, the last diplomatic conversation in the life of Ambassador Stevens was the one he had with that Turkish diplomat in Benghazi a couple of hours before he was killed. Now, remember, there was security nearby, right? There was that CIA annex that the Mormon faction there in the Congress was trying to hide at the time. But there was a CIA annex. There was a highly trained, highly effective 12-man CIA team, Special Forces veterans, whatever you want, essentially a small platoon. They would have had some effect for sure. But they were told, do not intervene. Remember, the heart of the story is that one of these guys was told not to intervene through the CIA chain of command. He went out to try anyway to save Stevens and got himself killed in the process. These are little people caught up in a bigger operation. Remember that Petraeus made sure that he was away from his office that night. He went to see Argo. He was like General Marshall and the Navy admiral there in Pearl Harbor, who decided to go on French leave the night before Pearl Harbor so that they couldn't be given any intelligence and required to do anything. So the CIA team that was nearby was told, do not intervene, do nothing, stand down. Well, then there was supposed to be a security provided by this February 25th Martyrs Brigade, and we've just been through the story of Eunice and Hifter. The story with the February 25th Martyrs Brigade was this is obviously a CIA asset. Otherwise, how would they be hired to provide security at the American Embassy? And we have even independent proof that they're a CIA asset because they were then used by the Hifter, the pro-Hifter group, right, the CIA generals in Libya, to eliminate General Eunice. And Eunice was the group that had stayed behind in the Gaddafi army. They were not so much under the control of the CIA as the Hifter group, who were lock, stock, and barrel CIA. So it was the February 25th Martyrs Brigade that was supposed to provide security, and they stood down. And to cap it all off, the actual killing was carried out by Sufyan Kumu, the Guantanamo veteran who had been sent back there and told, help overthrow Gaddafi, and he did. And then at a certain point, he was told to turn on Stevens, presumably his earlier comrade in arms, right? Somebody that Stevens would have every reason to trust. Stevens might have been told, hey, your friend Kumu is going to come and see you tonight here. Fine, great. No threat from that, except there was a threat, and Kumu was probably getting his own communications from Langley, time to do the operation. So that's the truth of the matter. And if they don't get to that, it's all a fraud, and all the whistleblowers will not change those facts. And it's not likely that they're going to bring that stuff up. Okay, so there we have that entire situation. Concerning the Boston Chechen patsies, this is now pretty much what we've said in the previous broadcast. The news items here are that 3 other figures from the same part of the world have been arrested for obstruction of justice and making false statements to to FBI officials in this case. I regard this as a weak attempt to shore up a very shaky body of evidence that the government, in this case Holder, hopes will convict the surviving patsy, right, the Jahar Tsarnaev. In every account that we hear, we're likely to also hear this element, oh, the government case against this guy is watertight. Oh, we don't need any of his own statements to hang him. We're going to convict him no matter what he says or doesn't say. Doesn't matter. We've got him cold. Well, all of this points to the fact that frankly, they don't. So they're attempting to shore up a rather rickety body of material that they want to use to railroad this guy. And it seems to me these 3 figures, all of them, people who tried to tamper with this overwhelming evidence, right? This seems to do nothing much for them but to try to give some credibility to this thing. Now, as we said last week, Uncle Ruslan, who lives right here in Montgomery County, Maryland, he seems to his home for quite a while was right by the lane divide on Interstate 270, right, where Interstate 270 splits. One way takes you to the Beltway going east. One way takes you to the Beltway going west. Uncle Ruslan, the normal guy who appeared out there saying, oh, those nephews of mine, they're misfits, they're losers, they can't assimilate. Well, he had assimilated. He had apparently married the daughter of Graham Fuller, top CIA and State Department official. And this is from Daniel Hopsiker. Hopsiker, not heard from too much since the days of 9/11, but an interesting story to be sure. Then we have Izvestia of the used to be the Soviet government newspaper. They go through the fact that Tamerlane, the elder brother, had attended a conference organized in apparently Georgia by the Jamestown Institute, founded by William Casey of the CIA, and the Caucasus Foundation. The Caucasus Foundation, of course, eagerly denies everything, and this is the machinery that interlinks with the American Committee for Peace in Chechnya. And we'll be back in just a minute. Crisis Radio. Just a couple of odds and ends left over from the first hour. There is a certain amount of back and forth on what Obama ought to do in Syria. Interestingly enough, the upper class blue blood reactionary George F. Will, right? Will the Shill, as we've known him over the years. Will, who I guess he's trying to take the position of William F. Buckley, but he doesn't quite get to that point. He doesn't have that authority. Will writes in the Washington Post of yesterday, Obama is right on everything. And the interesting angle that he takes is Obama has talked himself into a corner. Obama's policy is better than his description of it. So the idea is Obama is attempting to backtrack, pull away from the red line, talk about another line, another calculus, and so forth. Will is against the attack on Syria, and he goes back to Colin Powell's United Nations speech about Iraq weapons of mass destruction. What a terrible moment for the overrated Colin Powell. Hillary Clinton, of course, who is more or less, her theory is that aggression is in the DNA of the United States. We can't see any limits on what can be achieved by aggression, of course. Again, I have an idea Hillary may have pulled back from that somewhat in those last months in the State Department, saying, look, what do I care about Syria? I want the presidency. I've already had the presidency denied me once because I'm a warmonger, because I have to be a warmonger to compensate for my personality weakness. So let's hide the fact that I'm a warmonger, says Hillary, until I get power, and then I can, start a big war, maybe declare martial law, whatever. So that's George F. Will. Eugene Robinson telling Obama, stay out of Syria. Obama is right to resist the mounting pressure for military intervention. This could make things worse. And if you listen to the call-ins this morning on National Pentagon Radio, that is largely, I think, the temper of the American people. Sick of war. Now, let's just gather up some of those loose ends. I wanted to mention when we talked about Russia, we see no sign so far of the denouement described and evoked by Sybil Edmonds of the Boiling Frog website. You remember that Madame Edmonds was attempting to tell us that there was a firm deal between the United States and Russia to sell out Syria, that the Russians were eager to sell out Syria, and all they were looking for was a free hand to do what they want in Chechnya and Dagestan and these places. Well, of course, the rebellion in Chechnya has largely been quelled. It may be more active in other places. A certain degree of background terrorism remains. You have this Doku Umarov running around, obviously helped by NATO in various ways. But now we're seeing the hysteria around Boston decline, as it must, given the other big events happening in the world, and we don't see what Madame Edmonds was attempting to evoke. So I would say perhaps the anti-Russian animus of that analysis had somehow taken over and made it less realistic than it might have been. But, of course, we keep an open mind, right? And nothing is guaranteed. And, we've been disappointed by Russia under Medvedev. What remains to be seen is whether those unfortunate tendencies will continue now that Putin has been back for a year. So the two Boston patsies, their uncle Ruslan had married the daughter of Graham Fuller of the CIA and the State Department, according to Hopsicker's Mad Cow Morning News. And Tamerlane had attended this confab of quackademics and fighters organized by the Jamestown Institute, co-founded by William Casey of the OSS and CIA, the Caucasus Foundation. And we were also pointing out that this is exactly the circles frequented then by Zbigniew Brzezinski and the group that controls the Obama foreign policy. But indeed, at the American Committee for Peace in Chechnya, it's a co-production of the neocons and the Brzezinskyites. And Madame Edmonds was able to see the neocons okay, but somehow not the Brzezinskyites. So apparently some weaknesses, some flaws in that analysis. Now, let us shift our attention to economics. We are told this morning that U.S. unemployment is at a 4-year low. This, of course, is a trail of tears, because it simply means that enough people have dropped out of the labor force so that the labor force has shrunk, and therefore the jobs that exist seem to loom larger. We have to keep our eyes on the sequester. The sequester is a very big deal. The sequester is a process of ratcheting down the entirety of U.S. society into a greater degree of immiseration and exclusion than previously. Now, some of this has been understood, right? We've just had, in the last week, the fix for the air traffic controllers, right? We had a fix for the budget of the Federal Aeronautics Administration. Remember, the reactionary Republican thesis is government does nothing, therefore we can brutally, drastically cut government in any form, and there will be no result because government never does anything anyway. They used to argue that defense was an exception. Looks like that exception is gone by the boards, except for a few dyed-in-the-wool militarists, right? At this point in the U.S., the militarists are actually looking good compared to the Malthusians, right? The austerity goals. At least, of course, what I mean by that is to maintain certain assembly lines and certain benefits for the troops and for the veterans and so forth. So when the flying elite, and this has been pointed out by everybody and his brother, when the flying elite of bankers, influentials, editors, bigwigs, governors, senators, congressmen, when these characters are seriously inconvenienced, then immediately a fix is in order. Now, remember, the Obama regime had pledged that they would not allow case-by-case fixes for certain privileged enclaves within the federal budget, right? They wanted to point out that it had to be a comprehensive fix, and at a certain point, the Obama White House even said, we will not allow any fix unless it is accompanied by revenue, tax increase on the rich, right? The institution of the Buffett rule for millionaires. The millionaire can't pay a lower tax rate than his secretary and his other employees. Anyway, this then went through. Now let us look at this really grim panorama of cuts. And we'll just take them in no particular order. Let's begin. I guess Meals on Wheels is getting some significant attention this week. Meals on Wheels delivers millions of meals each day to shut-ins, senior citizens, the sick, people who are physically not capable of leaving their homes to go to some distribution center, cafeteria, food store. They can't shop for food. They can't cook it. They have to have it brought in. For some of them, it's the only person they talk to in the course of the day. Brutal cuts in Meals on Wheels. This is what we get from the reactionary Republicans. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. To World Crisis Radio. We're now looking at the horrors of sequestration. And once again, it is a turning point for American society as a whole. This is when killer cuts, genocidal austerity came to stay, apparently, because Obama has long since made his peace with the sequester. And the Republicans, it turns out they stand for nothing, right? The Republicans used to claim to be the Party of National Defense, right, the comprehensive, reliable warmonger party. They're none of that. Both parties are now the Austrian party, the Republicans more visibly, the Democrats in a hidden form. The Republicans don't give a damn about national defense. They care about the privileges of the rich and the super rich. So let's look at some of these horrors, right? As soon as the air traffic situation becomes a serious inconvenience, that is fixed. But how about Meals on Wheels, right? It's several million. I wish I had the figure per day, but you get the idea. It's an organization also. This is actually, it's a social phenomenon. It's not just a government program. This is probably one of the things the reactionaries hate the most. There are 2.2 million volunteers who volunteer their own time for free to deliver Meals on Wheels to needy people. So it's a public-private partnership, we might say, in a real sense. The government provides the money, then it obviously goes through private contractors, through, meal preparation centers. Volunteers get into the act, and so forth, and they deliver them. 2.2 million. But even with 2.2 million volunteers, you can't get very far if the money is cut. And that is now what has happened. So this week looked like there was a significant media attention to the actual killer cuts that were being carried out in Meals on Wheels. Now let's look at another one. Head Start. This is a preschool for poor kids. Now Obama, of course, is expansive. He wants to have a quality preschool for every kid, right? Every kid in the preschool age range. But he won't do anything to defend Head Start, which exists. And remember, for a lot of kids, if Meals on Wheels is maybe the only meal that senior, that shut-in, that invalid gets every day, Head Start is often the only square meal that one of those kids gets in a day because they get breakfast, right? It was found that they couldn't do anything in the way of education if the kids were so hungry. So they had to, very early on, right, in the 70s, build in a free breakfast and a somewhat decent one anyway to get that ability, right? So the kids had to be fed before they could be taught. So Meals on Wheels cut, Head Start cut. Now, the cuts in Head Start, about $400 million. The Obama administration has no bill pending to restore the Head Start cuts. And there's no bill pending that I know of by any congressman that will restore the cuts, right, of anything that's going to be taken up by the leadership, at least. All right. Housing assistance, right? This is all kinds of ways that people are assisted to stay in their homes, to avoid foreclosure, to find low-cost public housing, subsidies to stay in low-cost public housing, cut, and that's it, right? And too bad for you. Student loans. The interest rates are already going up on direct student loans, and more are coming. We're told that on July 1st, the interest rate on student loans is going to double from 3.4% to 6.8% on July 1st. Now, you remember, the first time that was attempted, we had the reactionary Republicans saying, yes, you should double the interest rate on student loans. That was one of Ron Paul's swan songs, right? One of his Parthian shots at the American people. Remember, Ron Paul, the great guru of the campuses, right, with his uncorruptible nature, he inflamed the aspirations of a generation of young people, young sociopaths, one might say. And then he turned around and voted yes. He voted in the House vote to raise the interest rate from 3.4 to 6.8. I guess that was delayed by a year, but now it's back again, and it looks like it's going to go through. All right, Medicare. Medicare gets 2% cuts. There are shortages in hospitals of key drugs and other elements. Due to 2% cuts in Medicare above and beyond all the gouging. Remember, this is above and beyond Obama's $700 billion cuts in Medicare and independent of his promised $400 billion cuts in Medicare, right? 1.1 trillion in Medicare cuts under Obama. This 2% is separate, above and beyond all of that. And most acutely, it comes in the area of chemotherapy drugs. So we've got chemotherapy patients who are being turned away. They're being told, sorry, go and die. You know, Hannity, in this reactionary parrot of the afternoon, he always says, oh, they say that we Republicans want old people to die. Why, it's outrageous. Well, here's a very concrete case. What have you been doing, Hannity, to get the cuts rolled back on Medicare, to save that entitlement? What's with the Republicans? What's with the Democrats? Of course. So here we have Congresswoman, I guess, Renee Elmer, Republican of North Carolina, a Republican from North Carolina who wants the Medicare cuts rolled back. Okay. WIC, Women, Infants, Children. It's one of the most successful programs. When you think of the hospital costs and costs for cognitive impairment, the labor power that is saved through WIC, what is it? It's some cheese and some eggs for expectant mothers and nursing mothers and some milk for infant children and stuff like this. That's WIC. Doesn't cost that much, but boy, does it beat paying for cognitive impairment and malnutrition and so forth, right? In terms of building a labor force, which is the goal. Those cuts have been rolling along, right? We were told a couple of weeks ago 600 to 700,000 women may be turned away from WIC by the time the first year of the sequester is over. How about FEMA, favorite whipping boy of the reactionaries, until some hurricane or something comes to town? FEMA is being docked $1 billion in disaster relief. $1 billion. So people in New York, New Jersey, you can thank your Republican congressman, and you can also thank Obama, right, when it comes to that. And unemployment benefits, right? We've got this going on all over the place, that unemployment benefits are being cut significantly as a result of the sequester. We have a couple of more. We have one very dramatic one that we want to talk to you about. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Keep up with all of this at Tarpley.net, and Webster G Tarpley Twitter feed. Well, we've looked at the air traffic controllers. Notice in this grand fix for air travel, there's nothing about the 150 control towers at small airports that are going to be shut down. Get ready for more crashes on the runways, on the tarmacs. We had one such this past week, right? 2 airplanes touching wings, as we were told. But no, the immediate focus on the air traffic controllers. So we've gone through the Meals on Wheels cuts, the Head Start cuts. We've gone through the cuts in housing assistance, the cuts in student loans, the cuts in Medicare, bad enough to even excite the pity of a Republican congresswoman from Colorado, the cuts in from North Carolina, the WIC cuts, the FEMA cuts, the jobless benefits. We've got exhibits closing at the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian says that some of their exhibit halls will have to be closed for the tourist season from May to September. Naturally, the Republicans say, oh, that's a self-arranged train wreck, right? The Republicans always claiming that government does nothing, cut to your heart's content, slash, burn, doesn't matter. They don't do anything anyway. Well, unfortunately, this is not the case. So there is a terrible price to be paid. And remember last week we had, I hesitate to bring it up, but the chicken inspectors, the U.S. Department of Agriculture chicken inspectors are getting a speed up, which is allowing more and more chickens to pass by, some of them befouled with fecal matter. Okay, so look forward to that when you go to your Chick-fil-A or similar place. I say Chick-fil-A because of their known reactionary views on so many things. But now let's look at one that ought to scare anybody. We've talked about the NIH, the National Institutes for Health. It's a way really to remind yourself of all the important things that government does do and which should not be obscured by right-wing ideology or, frankly, even by false flag operations, right? The fact that a Wall Street network inside the power ministries, right, inside the Pentagon, the CIA, and things like that, is able to carry out war provocations shouldn't blind us to the fact that all of these agencies that I've just been telling you about actually do significant good. So you got to keep a balanced view. The National Institutes for Health and research in general, I think for the National Institutes of Health, it's a $10 billion research budget, which is being cut by $1 billion. That is about what I heard. And there's a larger federal research budget, which is also being cut along the same lines. But now let's look at a very interesting article here in Bloomberg Business Week. Bloomberg Business Week. This is 29th of April to the 5th of May. The killer cost of Alzheimer's. Yeah, killer cost being increased by killer cuts. So we are told now that this is the most feared disease. Polling shows that people fear Alzheimer's more than cancer, more than a heart attack, more than the usual dread diseases. And I won't read the details of the specific case of a family that they talk about. But the study here quotes various sources saying Alzheimer's is on its way to become the financial sinkhole of the 21st century, in the view of Ken Dichtwald, a gerontologist, right? He studies oldies. The gerontologist Dichtwald, executive officer of Age Wave Consulting Firm, treating of dementia of all kinds costs more than heart disease or cancer, more than $150 billion a year in the United States, including the value of informal care. Rand Corporation getting into the act. Now, when Rand Corporation steps onto the field, watch out for Nuremberg material, and that may be what we have here. The number of Alzheimer's victims scheduled to double by 2040. Baby boomers aging into the Alzheimer's danger zone. Tremendous impact on the labor force. Women who provide most of the care may be forced to drop out of the labor force. HIV/AIDS has gone from a death sentence to a manageable illness in many cases. Alzheimer's, nothing of the kind. Alzheimer's was starved for research money. The interest went to AIDS. And here's the situation right now. Alzheimer's research funded by the National Institutes of Health was 6% lower in 2012 than it had been in 2009. And the reason was that the stimulus and the supplemental, so much attacked by howling, foaming reactionaries, provided money for Alzheimer's research. But then when the stimulus and the supplemental went away, when the Republicans came to town in 2010, 2011, that Alzheimer's research was cut. I wonder if there's a secret alliance between the Republicans and whatever it is that causes Alzheimer's, right? Maybe they're more afflicted. But it's down 6% from 2012 to 29. And then Alzheimer's funding goes down another 4% in the current fiscal year, that is to say 2011 to 2012, because of sequestration. Sequestration is cutting 4% of Alzheimer's funding. Now, remember, this is 10% of a rather small pie. the total cuts in Alzheimer's funding through the NIH, but it's a good sample, minus 10% from 2009 to today. And this was already not that much. The National Institutes for Health gives Alzheimer's 9% of its total research budget. That compares to 16%. They give 9% to Alzheimer's of the sum that they spend on cancer research. So cancer gets more than 10 times more than Alzheimer's, and Alzheimer's gets only 16% of what is spent on HIV/AIDS. Now, Gingrich, during the presidential campaign, talked about the Alzheimer's epidemic of having a price tag of $35 trillion. And it looks like we're headed that way. Now, we had this quote from a former head of the NIH, a Republican, an appointee of Mad Dog Bush the Younger, who said, the current wave of research cuts at the NIH is destroying an entire generation of scientific research because young researchers have careers to make. They've got student loans to pay off, among other things. This entire system is breaking down. But the young researchers, if they're discouraged, and here we'll give an example, they're likely to drop out of the field to go and become a hedge fund operator, right? Maybe they can do financial engineering. So here we have Michael Shalansky of the Taub Institute of Columbia University Medical Center. The tight research budgets are discouraging the bright young people who are making the greatest advances, people in their prime of scientific creativity, right? This is an important principle. Without scientific creativity and scientific discovery and technological realization, the society collapses. And here is exactly how it happened. So he's pointing to this. And we'll have some more details on this in just a minute. But the point is, the sequester is killing people. The sequester needs to be rolled back with the Wall Street sales tax. Back in a minute. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. Now, continuing, looking at this devastating impact of the killer cuts, the genocidal cuts that are embodied in the sequester already. Not even considering the $400 billion more Obama wants to cut, and what the Ryan budget and the Rand Paul budget want to do. They will, of course, make Ivan the Terrible roll over in his grave. So monstrous are those cuts and torture. But here we go. There's a National Institute for the Aging at the National Institutes for Health here in Bethesda, Maryland. The rate of acceptance of grant applications to the NIH-NIA, National Institutes on Aging, is 16%. And it turns out that more and more of the resources in the field, the research time, the labor time of people who should be doing primary scientific research, fundamental, groundbreaking scientific research, is being eaten up by writing grant applications. And remember, the temperament of the creative scientist, as one of these people points out, the temperament of the creative scientist is maybe not that of the grant writer, the bureaucrat and bureaucratic player. Example, Dr. Jang Ho Cha, neurologist. He's got an MD and a PhD. We don't know how much he's got in the way of student loans, but I'm sure he's got heavy-duty student loans. He has quit basic research out of frustration. He was an associate professor at Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital for 14 years until 2010. And his story is this. He says, quote, in the first 6 months of 2009, I wrote 9 grants. Each grant proposal is like writing a PhD dissertation. Well, that is true. That is an amazing thing. So 6 months, 9 grants, each one the equivalent of a PhD. So 9 PhD dissertations in half a year. This guy is sweating blood. And he says, none of them was funded. And I said to myself, you just went 0 for 9. What's your plan for next year? Take more shots on the goal? So he decided to quit. He got into Merck in the private sector, and this cannot be a plus. Some would say, oh, yes, the private sector is going to do it. No. The way this stuff works is the government comes up with the discoveries, and then they're pirated by the private sector. But at least that way you get some discoveries. At least something comes out the other end, right? Overpriced, whatever you want. Not what you wanted, flawed, but still something. When you put it all in the hands of the private sector, some corporate raider comes along and the program is destroyed. So he says, my hardest days at Merck are like my easiest days at Massachusetts General. Science is hard. More money is needed. Now, what might this science look like? Here's a very good example. We have a program of the administration, right? This is something Obama is pushing forward. Brain research through advanced innovative neurotechnology, right? So there's something happening. The most interesting, though, is this. A worldwide Alzheimer's disease neuroimaging initiative coordinating research in the United States, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, Taiwan, South Korea, Argentina, and China. If you look at the problem from many different angles, things will link up eventually. Now, this is exactly the right method. Worldwide scientific cooperation. This also helps world peace, needless to say. So there is scientific research going on, and this ought to be supported. But it doesn't do any good for Obama to propose new things when he's talking about cutting what already exists. Now, this is a very important principle. I had some discussions out there in Denver about this very fundamental fact, which perhaps has gotten lost among other issues. First of all, obviously, the way you maintain these essential functions, everything I've just said, right, be it Meals on Wheels, Head Start, air traffic controllers, housing assistance, student loans, Alzheimer's research, Medicare, WIC, FEMA, Smithsonian, chicken inspectors, and all that. We want the Wall Street sales tax. It's the only thing that immediately impacts all of these things. Glass-Steagall is a process reform. Glass-Steagall will not cut the mustard. The average person, it's a bridge too far. For agitation, it's always going to be a bridge too far, no matter how literate your population. Because if you can't fight off killer cuts in austerity in the short run using the Wall Street sales tax, all that other stuff is pie in the sky. And remember, Glass-Steagall is something you want to do before the panic. Well, we may also now be before the next panic, right? There are some signs that another panic, another bubble, and another panic is coming. But still, the time for Glass-Steagall was about 2006, 2007. That would have been good. And we have organizations even like, LaRouche, right? And when Glass-Steagall was repealed, there was nary a peep. Maybe a couple of little paragraphs, sentences in a couple of articles. No mobilization, no campaign, because after all, it was being done by Bob Rubin and Larry Summers and the Clinton administration. So that could not be criticized. Therefore, what we're talking about here is the function of reason in human society. And I must say my attention was brought to an absolutely horrific program on Fox News with Steve Doocy. Right now, Steve Doocy is the modern equivalent of a clown from the Hippodrome. 20 years ago, Steve Doocy was the comic weatherman of the Fox Broadcasting Network station here in Washington, D.C. He was a bad joke, but now he's an expert in all these fields. Right? He appears on this this reactionary hit parade every morning with an overdone tomato and this other character. But now he's talking. It turns out that there was the first time that he had heard the word reason had been May 2nd, right? Coming up this week, right? Yesterday. It was the Day of Reason. Some group of atheists, obviously, wants to call it Reason Day. So they use, Fox News, of course, wants to counterattack that. But they go much further, right? If you want to say, I want to be free from religion, fine. Go do what you want. But Steve Doocy gets on this woman, Penny Nance, and they do a horrendous vilification of human reason. And she quotes G.K. Chesterton about this, right? Original sin is absolutely proven. Original sin is proven, but so is human creativity. And it's a question of which are you looking for, right? If you want to degrade mankind to some horrendous status of a worm, you'll find all the evidence you want. But there's the other side. There's the what a piece of work is man, right? How noble in accomplishments. That's there too. The side of scientific discovery, technological modernization, and so forth. So this woman, I don't know what her qualifications are, but she was a good enough propaganda vehicle. Penny Nance, Concerned Women for America. And she says, you know, the age of enlightenment and reason gave way to moral relativism. And moral relativism is what has led us all the way down the dark path to the Holocaust. Dark periods of history is what we arrive at when we leave God out of the equation. Well, let's not look at the God side of it right now, but the allegation that the Enlightenment per se and human reason lead to moral relativism, this is anathema. And the answer to that is the figure of Leibniz. The scientific side of the Enlightenment with Leibniz is what has created modern civilization in the good sense. Now, there's a real Enlightenment with Leibniz. There's a fake Enlightenment with Rousseau and Voltaire. They represent irrationalism. But Leibniz is the positive side. One of Leibniz's main proposals is cheap energy, and therefore Leibniz would not have been for green fuels and biofuels, where the Air Force pays $59 a gallon for green gasoline. Leibniz's society paper talks about billiges Feuer, cheap fire, low-cost energy. So scientific optimism and human reason are exactly what we need, and not the lunacy purveyed by Fox News. Back next week on World